Jessica Price was a woman of many layers, an unassuming presence in the small town she called home, living her life as best as she could. On a cold night, she made an agreement with a stranger, $500 for one night. A simple transaction, a one-time deal. But when the morning came, Jessica was gone. Hours later, when police found her, only half of her body was discovered, abandoned like a discarded puzzle piece. What could have possibly happened in those hours? And what was so unsettling about this meeting that left so many unanswered questions in its wake? If you're intrigued by this chilling mystery, hit the like button, drop your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Let's uncover the truth together. It was a quiet evening, the kind that seems too calm, too peaceful, when something unexpected happens. Jessica Price, a woman with a complicated past and a fragile future, stepped into the night, hoping to make some quick cash. She didn't know it then, but this one choice would set in motion a chain of events that no one could have imagined. She had no idea that the man waiting for her, the one who promised her $500 for one night, would take her into a situation she would never leave alive. Hours later, when the police found her, only half of her body had been recovered. The rest was gone, vanished without a trace. And the questions? They were endless. What kind of man would do something so cold? What kind of act could reduce a person's life to only pieces left behind? Tonight, we're going to walk through the twisted path that led to Jessica's tragic death. What was supposed to be a routine exchange, a simple meeting, became something much darker. Stay with us as we uncover a story full of deception, secrets, and mystery. What really happened that night? Keep watching to find out. But before we continue, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe if you want to be part of this investigation as it unfolds. Let's begin. Jessica Price lived a life like many others, quiet, perhaps a little troubled, but always looking for a way to survive. On that fateful night, she agreed to meet someone she didn't know, someone who offered her $500 for a brief encounter. But as simple as the arrangement seemed, things quickly escalated into something far worse. When her body was discovered, the community was left in shock. Only half of her was found. No one could understand how something so gruesome could happen to someone so seemingly ordinary. As investigators began to piece together the clues, strange and unsettling details began to emerge. This was no random act of violence, and the more they uncovered, the more questions arose. Who was this mysterious man? Why was Jessica chosen? And most chilling of all, what happened in those final hours before she was lost forever? Today, we'll examine the details of the case, the search for answers, and the chilling discovery that turned Jessica Price's death into a mystery that still haunts everyone involved. Jessica Price was no stranger to hardship. Raised in a fractured home, she'd learned early that survival often meant making difficult choices, choices that no one else could understand. By her late 20s, Jessica had tried to move beyond her past, finding work in a small town far from the chaotic life she once knew. But life was never easy, and bills piled up. When a man approached her with an offer she couldn't refuse, $500 for one night, she saw it as a quick solution to her problems. The deal, as it seemed, was simple enough. $500 for a night in the company of a stranger. No strings, no complications. Just an exchange of money for time. Jessica didn't think twice. The night was dark, and as she stepped out of her modest apartment, the streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the empty sidewalks. It was a cold winter evening when Jessica made her way to a seedy motel on the outskirts of town. The address was vague, the kind of place you don't want to be seen entering. She had no reason to feel afraid. She had been in worse situations before, and she had learned to be tough and to guard her emotions. But there was something about this place that didn't sit right with her. As she walked down the grimy hallway of the motel, her footsteps echoed against the cracked walls. The door to room 13 opened with a soft creak, and there, standing just inside the threshold, was the man. He was tall, his features obscured by the dim light from the cracked window. She couldn't see his face, but the air between them was thick with unspoken tension. He handed her the $500, but instead of warmth or gratitude, something cold flickered in his eyes. She tried to shake it off, to believe it was just her nerves playing tricks. But as the door clicked shut behind her, the silence was oppressive, too quiet. In that moment, Jessica felt the world close in, but it was already too late. She had made her choice, and now she was trapped in a place she didn't fully understand. Hours passed, and by morning, Jessica was missing. Her phone had been turned off, and no one had heard from her. Her absence seemed out of place, like a part of the town had vanished. The morning after, police received a call that would haunt them for days to come. A body had been discovered. It wasn't all of her. Half of Jessica's body was found discarded like garbage in a field just outside the motel. Her torso, her arms, her legs, nothing was left of her lower half. No one could explain it. How could something so horrific happen in such a small town? The motel manager had heard nothing. The only witness was a man who had checked into the room earlier that night, a man whose identity was as elusive as the truth itself. Police scoured the motel, finding no clear evidence. They interviewed the few people who had seen Jessica that night, but the answers only deepened the mystery. The suspect was a shadow, a man who seemed to disappear the moment anyone tried to catch him. Was he someone she knew? Was it a random act of violence? Or was there something darker hiding in plain sight, a truth just out of reach? As the days turned into weeks, investigators were left with only questions. The trail went cold, and with it, Jessica's story began to slip from the public's memory. But there were still pieces left unaccounted for, pieces that would eventually lead them into an investigation they could never have predicted. Jessica Price wasn't the kind of person you'd expect to meet in a dark motel room, agreeing to a deal with a stranger. She was tough, resilient even, fighting to leave behind the shadows of a troubled past. Born into foster care, Jessica had never known stability. Her childhood was marked by uncertainty, and she learned early on that the world wasn't always kind. She wasn't the kind of woman to take things at face value. Trust didn't come easy for her, and that was something she'd built over time, a shield. But, like so many others who've struggled to find their footing, she was also vulnerable. Life in the margins had a way of wearing you down, of pushing you to the edge, where choices like the one she made that night seemed almost inevitable. $500, a sum that could clear a few bills, buy some groceries, or maybe even cover a night out. A seemingly harmless transaction, a quick exchange. But Jessica, ever the pragmatist, knew the risks. She was no stranger to making compromises, even when it meant stepping into situations that didn't feel right. Why did she agree to meet this man? Was it just the money? Or was there something deeper at play, something she couldn't avoid? Now the man she met remains shrouded in mystery. He's never been identified, and his motivations, those remain elusive. The investigators scoured the area, looking for any clues, any hint of who he was, but it's as if he vanished into thin air after that night. Descriptions of him varied. Tall, average build, maybe in his late 30s. Nothing concrete enough to narrow it down. His face, completely obscured in Jessica's memory. Was this a random meeting, or was he someone from her past? Could this man have been a figure Jessica knew, someone who'd slipped under the radar, someone with a hidden connection to her? Maybe it wasn't the money at all. Maybe it was something more personal. People with Jessica's background often make decisions based on their surroundings, on the pressures that weigh down on them. But was she just desperate for cash? Or was something else at play here? Did she sense danger but chose to ignore it? Or had she convinced herself that a single night, a single deal wouldn't lead to the horrors that followed? And what about the suspect? What drove him to commit an act so chilling? Could it have been premeditated, or was it a crime of opportunity? The fact that he remained in the shadows, disappearing without a trace, suggests someone who knows how to stay hidden, someone who might have been waiting for the right moment. What was his story? And what did he want with Jessica? Was he just a predator picking a random target, or was this part of something far larger? Did he have a history with her, something that perhaps no one else knew? As we try to understand Jessica's choices, we're left with just as many questions about the man who met her that night. What was his true purpose? And how did this mysterious figure lead to an event that no one could have foreseen? When authorities arrived at the scene, what they found was horrifying, but not in a way anyone could have prepared for. Half of Jessica's body was discarded in a secluded field just outside town. Her torso, arms, and legs were lying motionless, as though placed carefully, with macabre precision. But her head, her lower half, gone, vanished. No one could understand why. How could someone commit such an act of violence and then leave such a grisly puzzle behind? It didn't make sense. For the detectives, this wasn't just a simple case of a missing woman turned murder. This was something far more complex. They had to piece together Jessica's life in a way they never had to before, sifting through her interactions, the few people who saw her that night, and every lead that surfaced, no matter how small or insignificant it seemed. And slowly, a clearer picture began to form. The first breakthrough came when forensic specialists uncovered traces of blood in Jessica's apartment, leading them to believe the violence had occurred there before her body was discarded. There were also strands of hair found in the motel room, a few strands, but enough to suggest she'd struggled with someone. But the key evidence didn't come from the scene. It came from the surveillance cameras, the ones outside the local gas station, just a few blocks from the motel. It was here that the suspect was caught on tape, entering the gas station minutes after Jessica's last known contact. He was wearing a dark hoodie, his face partially hidden, but his height, his build, they matched the descriptions. The footage, though grainy, was crucial in piecing together the timeline. But even more chilling were the fingerprints left behind on the motel door. A fingerprint so clear, it would lead investigators to a man they'd never suspected, a local named Martin Hayes. Hayes was a quiet man, known to the town but not for any violent history. In fact, he had a reputation for being a reclusive loner, someone who had rarely left the confines of his home. So why would his fingerprint be on the motel room door? What connection did he have to Jessica? It wasn't enough to arrest him immediately, but it was a lead they couldn't ignore. As the investigation unfolded, the detectives uncovered strange details about Hayes's past. He had worked in the same neighborhood as Jessica years ago as a part-time maintenance worker. They had crossed paths at least once before, but that wasn't the only surprising connection. Jessica had worked at a small diner where a woman, now deceased, had been killed years earlier by none other than Martin Hayes's brother. The connection was chilling. Was it possible that Hayes wasn't just involved in this crime? Could there have been a deeper motive, one tied to the unresolved mystery of his brother's death? As the detectives followed this new lead, something else surfaced. A piece of Jessica's missing body, her head, was discovered in a small pond just outside town. No one knew who placed it there or why, but its discovery changed everything. It now seemed clear that Jessica had been the victim of a carefully orchestrated crime. But why? Was this just a random act of violence, or was there something more personal at play? The deeper the investigation went, the more questions emerged, questions that could lead to another unexpected twist in the case. As the investigation continues to unfold, several theories have emerged, each darker than the last. Was Jessica's killer a random stranger, or was this a crime fueled by something more personal? The circumstances surrounding the deal she made for $500 suggest it might not have been as innocent as it first appeared. Could this have been a random act of violence, or was Jessica targeted specifically? Perhaps the man she met that night knew something about her, something he wanted to settle. Then there's the possibility of revenge. The connection to Martin Hayes's brother raises the question, was this an act of retribution, a way to pay back a past wrong? Could Jessica have unknowingly been caught in the crossfire of a family's unresolved vendetta? And why was part of her body left behind? Could the dismemberment have been a twisted message, something personal, a need to humiliate or send a signal? Was the crime carefully planned from the beginning, or did something go terribly wrong during their meeting? The timing of the murder, the way her body was discovered, it all suggests a level of premeditation. But could there have been another motive at play? What do you think? Was Jessica's death the result of a violent act gone wrong, or was there a deeper, more hidden motive at work? Who do you think is responsible, and what drove them to commit such an unthinkable crime? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Do you believe this was random, or do you think there's something more behind the tragic events of that night? The case of Jessica Price remains one of the most perplexing and chilling mysteries to date. While we've uncovered some shocking evidence and made connections that could point to a deeper, more personal motive, there are still so many unanswered questions. Who was the man Jessica met that night? Was his involvement a random act, or was it part of something much darker? Why was her body discarded in such a gruesome way? The answers still elude us, and the investigation continues. But justice for Jessica remains a distant hope. What do you think really happened that night? Was it revenge, a random crime, or something even more unsettling? Could the killer still be out there, hiding in plain sight? Drop your theories and thoughts in the comments below. Let's continue to discuss this case, and maybe together we'll start to piece together the truth. If you want to hear more about this case and other unsolved mysteries, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth true crime documentaries. Your support helps us continue to bring these stories to light. Until next time, stay curious and never stop questioning.